Good morning, everyone, on what has to be the strangest Remembrance Sunday in living memory. To not stand together for a 2-minute silence, to remember those who have died to protect our way of life, and to remind ourselves of the ongoing courage and sacrifice of those in the armed forces today just feels wrong, doesn't it? Well, in today's latest passage from James in our sermon series, it's appropriately talking about being peacemakers. And it asks the question, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Now, I'd love to say that I deliberately planned it out for that to be the case. That a couple of months ago, I sat down, I worked out what we could study that would give us an appropriate verse for Remembrance Sunday. But that would be a lie, and going completely against what the point of today's passages are. It's just a coincidence, but for those faithfully following our services, and so been following our midweek services, midweek sermon series on the book of Ruth, then you will know last Wednesday I spoke of how our God is a God of coincidences. Now, if you haven't been following them, then why not use this lockdown as an opportunity to go back and catch up? It's all there on our Facebook and our YouTube accounts, and like James, Ruth, I believe, has a lot to teach us at a time such as this. So what are we to make of this coincidence of a passage calling us to be peacemakers on this Sunday of all Sundays? Well, as always, the first place to start is the actual context that the passage is speaking to. It's so easy to read the Bible and make it fit what we want it to say. It'd be very easy for me to take that verse, link it to the theme of remembrance, and deliver a nice and appropriate sermon that you'd hopefully go away feeling pleased with, that the vicar did right today. The only problem with doing that would be that once again I'd be going against what the passage is saying. I'd be simply trying to please the world as opposed to staying faithful to what God might want to say to us this morning. And I've seen many times that when we do that, nothing changes. We aren't able to see the power of God at work. And so we have to start with the context that James was writing to. So let's start by remembering who James was. He was Jesus' younger brother, and as such he was a powerful voice within the early church. At the time it was incredibly dangerous to be a Christian. James himself was eventually killed because of his faith. So knowing how hard it was to live out in the world, James wanted to encourage particularly those Jews who had decided to become followers of Jesus, that had been forced to scatter across the Roman Empire. It's a letter that's filled with practical advice on how to live, how to be community, how to grow in your faith. James is wanting to encourage them to keep going, to reach a point of spiritual maturity. I think it's fair to say that today we live in dangerous times, don't we? But the enemy now is one that we cannot see, whether coronavirus or terrorism. And we all need that same sense of encouragement to keep going, especially at the start of another lockdown. We all need help to grow in our faith, to become more spiritually mature. In today's passage, James starts with the call to seek wisdom. And as we continue to read through this letter, we realise that the wisdom James is speaking about is very different to how that term might be used today. See, it's not just about being wise in your decision making, or knowing when to just walk away from something. Wisdom for James is all about this choice between pride or humility. Pride being the way of the world, how everything around us operates. Humility being the way of God, the example that Christ set for us. This is a topic that is central to the gospel and the life a Christian is called to lead. Now, I'm pretty sure if there was a poll done today, most people would like to think of themselves as someone who is humble and not proud, who is considerate to others rather than just doing things out of selfish ambition, who is able to be impartial and on the side of truth. But this is a journey that James himself had to go on. Many scholars believe that James didn't become a follower of Christ, become a Christian, until after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Remember those words of Jesus in Luke chapter 4, that no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Maybe James had to go through this process of removing the plank out of his own eye before attempting to take the speck out of his brother's. And now he encourages all Christians everywhere to do the same. And preparing for this sermon, amongst other things, I listened to some podcasts. One contained a sermon by Timothy Keller on this exact passage. Now within it, he himself refers back to a book he read, written by the great preacher Jonathan Edwards. And before I tell you what it said, I want to kind of pause and just encourage you in something as we start another lockdown. See, many people believe that we're kind of now fully transitioning into a new age, this digital age. And one of the great things about that is the incredible wealth of wisdom and understanding that is now available to you at the touch of a button. Remember the battles of people like John Wickliffe, desperate for people to be allowed to hear and read the Bible in their own language? Well, now you can spend all day, every day, reading the Bible, praying to God and listening to the teaching of wise biblical teachers from all around the world. You can buy books without needing to leave your house. We need to remember that amazing freedom that we have still in this country and be grateful for that and make the most of that. And we are committed as a church to putting services and times of communal prayer online. But it's my intention that these are just the starting points, the beginning of exploring, not the end. So I want to encourage all of you to seek out further teaching, to spend time worshipping and praying outside of these organised sessions. If you don't know who to listen to or where to look, then get in touch with us. Elliot, our new Andy, who's starting tomorrow, and myself would love to recommend something for you. Okay, back to the issue now of humility and pride. So the book Timothy Keller was referring to had this rather catchy title called Some Thoughts Concerning the Present Revival of Religion in New England. It's a great title, isn't it? In it, he says that Jonathan Edwards is looking at why some revivals seem to just fizzle out or what goes wrong with them. And he highlights this issue of spiritual pride. Helpfully, Keller puts this list of what Edwards sees as spiritual pride into a more modern language for us to be able to understand better today. So if we're kind of sat here today thinking and wondering, what do we have an issue with pride? Well, let's go through this really helpful checklist. There are 6 in total that Jonathan Edwards highlights. Number 1, spiritual pride makes you more aware of others' faults than you are of your own. But humility makes you far more aware of your own faults than others. And this leads to number 2. Pride leads you, when you speak of others' faults, to have an air of contempt and disdain. But humility, a humble person, means that whenever you do speak of other people's faults, and notice there, Jonathan Edwards is saying whenever you do, not that you don't, so humble people don't just back off and do nothing. It says that you only ever do it with grief and mercy. Number 3, pride quickly leads you to separate from people you have criticised or who may criticise you. But spiritual humility means you stick with people even through difficult relationships. You don't give up on them. Number 4, a proud person is dogmatic and sure about every point of belief. Proud people cannot distinguish between major and minor things because everything to the proud person, everything they believe in, is major. Number 5, a proud person either loves to confront because they like winning, or they refuse to confront because they don't want the criticism or the controversy. For a humble person, they confront when it's necessary. If you love over-confronting or you hate confronting, if you do it too much or you never do it because you're afraid, then according to Jonathan Edwards, you're not humble. Humble people confront necessarily. Proud people confront too much or too little. And finally, number 6, a proud person is often unhappy or sorry for themselves because proud people are filled with self-pity. Because A, they are so sure they know how life ought to go, and B, they're sure they deserve a good life. But humble people say, oh, I deserve to be cast off, but only by God's grace am I living, and I don't know what's best for me. And as a result, Edwards says proud people are always filled with self-pity and are unhappy with life. But humble people very seldom are, and have no self-pity at all. So a quick recap of these 6 distinctions Jonathan Edwards makes of what it means to be a humble person. Humble people are slow to speak of other people's faults, and when they do, they always speak very gently and respectfully and kindly, never disdainfully or proudly. Their goal is always to heal, never just to win for the sake of being right. They don't give up on people, but persevere through hard and difficult relationships. They are flexible rather than dogmatic, able to see the difference between a major and a minor point. They are not afraid of confronting, but they don't like it. And they have almost no self-pity, accepting that God knows best for their life. So how did you do? I mean, when pride and humility are brought into a kind of reality in that way, it's tough to hear, isn't it? But when we pause, it's easy to see why spiritual pride is an absolute killer of community. It makes it impossible for us to be a peacemaker. It's arguably the biggest problem in our world today, whichever end someone may be, whether too arrogant and so just being kind of self-seeking and what they want, or who having low self-esteem and so not challenging where we need to challenge. Either way, the danger is to be too focused on ourselves. If we want God to come near to us, James is clear that we must humble ourselves before God, attempt to take that plank out of our own eye, and only then are we able to sow in peace. And if we do that, then God will lift us up, and what is sown will reap a harvest of righteousness, by which James means we'll be put right with God and with each other. There'll be this reconciliation that takes place, that our community may become known as one of grace and mercy. I hope that's what we all long to see. There are lots of reasons right now, aren't there, for us to grumble and complain. We really don't need to take too long to think about that. But if we pause, then we also know it's not going to change anything. So as we face another lockdown, as we watch the news in disbelief, on this Remembrance Sunday, let us shake off our spiritual pride and seek humility. Let us use this time to pray, to study the scriptures, to submit to God, to strive for all that makes for peace. As we remember the courage and the sacrifice of others today, let us be willing to be courageous for God, willing to sacrifice our own desires so God can use us for his glory. And as the old saying goes, it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. God is ready and waiting. So open yourself up to God. Be willing for God to challenge you today, because our God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. Draw near to God, because God will draw near to you.